Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to do our question and answer from our last Tuesday session. We dealt with postpartum and depression, coping, and supporting others. So we have a few questions to go over tonight. I wanted to let you know that next week, on Tuesday, not this week, but the following week, we're going to start talking about what blessings are. And then beyond that, we're going to talk about some other blessing issues. And tomorrow, we're talking about values and respect. So we appreciate those that have responded back to us. We've actually got some on TikTok that have responded to us. So we'll get started here. First question is, who is the right person to talk to first when you think you might be depressed?
So the term like right person is kind of iffy because there's not necessarily, I guess, a right person. It just kind of goes situationally, I feel like. But the simple answer would be a trusted adult or a trusted friend or somebody. A parent would be your first option if that's something that you're comfortable with, or that's something that you think is a good option. I know sometimes going to parents is not in the best interest, but most of the time, talk to a parent. A teacher is a good advocate for if you think you might be depressed. A counselor, um, like I said, a close friend. But telling that somebody is you starting. That's how you start somewhere. So just talking to somebody would be your first step to getting help if that's what you were wanting, or maybe even just getting support. Talking to that one person, I think, is important, and um, your first step to getting help and advocating for yourself.
Okay, I want to add to that if we have any parents listening, and that is it's just vitally important that you stay connected with your teen or preteen. So you're understanding some of the transitions they're making. We're doing some research right now, and what we're finding is in the average American home, parents and children talk on average 35 minutes a week. Now, if we're only talking 35 minutes a week with our child or our teen, it's highly unlikely they're going to confide in you. But you really should be the focal point for your child. Um, so I just want to make that suggestion to you all. Second question. What's the difference between supporting someone and enabling unhealthy behavior?
Okay, this is a good one because I see in some circumstances um, where we're trying to help someone, we accidentally kind of make it worse or kind of carve a space for them to make it worse, and that's where it would fall under enabling. So what that is you do most of the time have good intentions, but what you're doing is you're keeping somebody stuck in unhealthy patterns or an unhealthy situation. And then supporting would be the caring for them while still encouraging that growth and responsibility and making healthy choices. And that also includes having consequences to actions, holding accountable to actions. That would be more in the supporting than enabling. A lot of the time when we enable people, we don't hold much accountability towards that person. It's more kind of a free for all, just, give all that you can to try to help that person, but sometimes that just helps them stay stuck and helps them it doesn't help them very much. So that's like the kind of clear difference is sometimes supporting doesn't mean um, fully compromising boundaries. I see that a lot when supporting, instead of enabling, or when I see people enable people, they usually compromise some sort of boundary, personal boundary, house boundary, family boundary, whatever the case may be. I hope that makes sense for you, but that's kind of like the clear difference.
Okay, I'm going to go a little different direction here. Um, enabling is encouraging them to move forward, but there really is no accountability to enabling. Now, the other side of enabling is equipping. And when you're equipping somebody, it means you're coming alongside of them and you're providing some direction, some instruction to them, some guidance to them. But the big thing is there's a significant and diligent effort to keep them accountable, because to equip really is to cause change. Um, and I think sometimes we get enabling and equipping. They're not interchangeable. Um, but I think we have a lot of people that like to enable people, but they never really get to the root of the issue. But when you're equipping somebody, you're really getting to the root and then working for a long-term change. Question 3. How do you take care of your own mental health while helping someone else with theirs?
I like to say it's kind of hard to fill up somebody's cup with an empty pitcher. And what I mean by that is it's hard to take care of somebody else's mental health when you haven't taken care of your own. So I think it is difficult, and sometimes it causes disservice in the other person if you're not your best self and you're trying to help them. Because it causes disadvantage in yourself and sometimes the other party that you're trying to help. And what I really mean by that is supporting somebody in their mental health does not mean sacrificing your own. I think it's still something you can do. Because whether we have, a good mental health or a bad mental health at the time, we still need to have boundaries no matter what when we are supporting others in their mental health, because it can be exhausting and it can be taken advantage of and kind of put on top of your shoulders. And that's why we need to have that clear line of we're not here to fix anybody. We're just here to support them on their journey and be a good friend and offer advice, but we cannot control anybody's actions and we cannot help anybody or make anybody do anything. That would have to be that other party's choice at the end of the day. And that's where a lot of people, I feel like, kind of get consumed and swept under the rug almost, because they do take responsibility for, trying to fix them or, like Ken said, like equip them. But sometimes that makes us forget about ourselves, and you kind of realize how far you've let yourself go, and then how you look over and you see how much you're holding and it's somebody else's issues. And that's why we need to be clear on our boundaries, that we're not here to fix people. We're just here to kind of be there for people to lean on.
Okay. I want to share a story. For many, many years, had an alcohol addiction. And you always found out that when you went to the bar, it was the perfect environment to help other people that had the same problems as yours. And all you ended up doing was sitting around trying to solve each other's problems. And at the end of the night, it was futile because neither of them really wanted to change in the first place. But I use that because I think sometimes if we're having issues and then one of our friends bring their issues to us, it can be not only overwhelming, but it becomes so subjective because it ends up being about me rather than about them in many cases. So I would just, again, I think what Alexa said, it's not your responsibility to fix anybody. You have yourself to work on and to do your best to reconcile your issue. Okay, the next question is, what do you do when depression makes you want to isolate and even pull away from people who you care about?
So the isolation and withdrawal is more of a symptom that you find from depression. It's something that it's kind of, I know some people describe depression as like a disease. So it's kind of like that fog of I want to be by myself with my own thoughts. I want to withdraw. It's normal to feel like that. Because, like I said, it is a symptom. It's not something that's crazy and out there. But I have struggled and do struggle with this sometimes where I just kind of want to shut everybody out and never talk to them until the sun comes back out. But what I have learned to do is just to simply be honest about it. I've had to tell a few people, like, I told a few people that I struggle with seasonal depression and I'm feeling this way, but I'm doing this about it. And even just communicating that to somebody kind of helps me keep myself accountable and to not actually confiding in that isolation because it does make it worse. And we don't want to confide in that isolation. We want to try to find ways to pull ourselves out of it. I've had to make myself go and talk with friends sometimes, but that small 5 minutes of communicating how I felt with my friends saved me probably a few hours of, or maybe even days of isolating myself and my thoughts, and it never gets any better. It just kind of spirals from there. It feeds the depression. So I would say start small and be honest about how much you can and can't handle right now, and good people will respect that, and good friends will respect that and will support that. And always remember, do not feed into your isolation because it does feed into depression, but know it is a normal feeling to want to.
Okay. I think it's also important that if you start noticing symptoms of depression, I think it's vitally important to figure out whether this is seasonal depression, acute depression, or chronic depression. And it's very important to, if you could possibly do it, probably to have an appointment with a doctor, and possibly they can better assess it. Because if it's just seasonal depression, it's quite easy to go into that isolation mode. Sometimes isolation is a helpful way to look at things in retrospect. It's not always necessarily bad. It's just recognizing, why am I withdrawing from individuals? But you certainly want to have a plan, not to allow that isolationism to get any worse. Okay. How do you tell the difference between needing rest and avoiding your problems?
Okay, so a difference in between needing rest and avoiding your problems. This can be determined by kind of how you feel afterwards. And what I mean by that is just simply asking yourself, is this break helping me recover so I can re-engage? or is it helping me escape so I don't have to do it anymore or deal with it? And I like this question because I genuinely use it. There's been times, I'll give an example. The other day, I was in my math class and we were learning a new subject, and I always get math. I always get it, even if the teacher sucks. Okay, I usually can get it, but this time, I could not understand. I could not put two and two together. It was really hard for me, and in that spot, I got up and I grabbed the bathroom pass and went to the bathroom. And I did that, and I didn't do it so I could skip math class and not do my math work. I did it so I can re-engage. I was flustered, I was upset, I was kind of frustrated with myself, but I went to the bathroom. I had that little bit of isolation, recouped my thoughts, and then I went back and I tried again, and I received my test results today and I got 100. Those little things, that's kind of how I tell if I'm escaping something that I don't want to deal with, or if I'm kind of regaining some kind of thought, because I know as girls as well, it's easy to lose the plot. A lot of the time, a small little bit of information or a small, I guess, emotion can turn really big and can spiral into a whole different thing that it wasn't even what it was in the first place. I hope that makes sense, but it can spiral, and that's why I take those breaks and you regenerate. But there has been times where I wanted to get up and skip class and not deal with it, but that's not going to do any good for me. So I really do like that question, just knowing if you're trying to re-engage or you're trying to run away from it. It's a good thing to ask yourself. It works on your critical thinking skills as well, and it helps with your emotional intelligence, all of the above. So practicing that's something I do.
Okay. In addition to that, if you choose to avoid a problem, you need to recognize it's not going to go away. And the longer you choose to avoid it, the more negative the consequences are going to be in avoiding that situation. So I think the healthy thing to do is what Alexis said, and that is you just take a break, refocus, get re-engaged, and go back at it. Okay, what are some signs that someone needs professional help, not just encouragement?
So if you are suspecting that somebody needs more of a professional help, here's kind of like the signs you're going to see. And that's just if somebody is really persistent with their symptoms of depression, really consistent with those negative feelings, and it's kind of just hard to see the light at all, I think that's a good determination of getting more serious help. But also, it's hard to determine as a separate party. That is more determined by, I guess, the person with depression and needs to be recognized more. But if you are that third party, just if you are noticing compromise of that third party's safety, or you notice that tasks are not necessarily tasks, but your person is being affected physically, not just mentally, I think that's a good indicator that it needs more professional help, because depression is that mental illness. And if it causes physical effects, that's kind of a good indicator that it's more of a chronic depression, and chronic depression does need help and it does need assistance. A lot of the time it'll be a lot of isolation and withdrawal. that you will be seeing from somebody who is struggling. I know when I struggle, I don't talk a lot with other people, and when it's intense, and I think that could be an indicator. Um, Also, if self harm's involved, that's a huge indicator that somebody needs help. Chronic depression can lead into suicidal thoughts, and most of the time will lead into suicidal thoughts. And sometimes that can lead into self harm, and it needs to be taken care of immediately. Um, but we don't want to get it to that point. So any signs of persistent, intense emotions, it needs to be checked out by a doctor or a medical professional, I'd say.
Okay, I'm going to comment on this because I think one has to figure out what's causing my depression. And you can figure that out. It's not usually that in depth. But I'm going to use an example, and starting in 2026, we're going to have an extensive teaching on the effects social media has on the brain. And it's interesting that most of the most of the drug, alcohol addictions that people have is pretty much minute to the addiction that we're finding with preteens and teenage kids and young adults with an addiction towards social media. So I think the first thing is you gotta figure out what is it that's causing you to think that way. Um, and I'm a believer that many times people can solve their own situations if they are honest with themselves and recognize that they need to change their behavior. They need to change some lifestyles that would diffuse them or even free them from um, the issue that's causing the depression. Um, I think professional help is very important, but you have to remember bad professional help worsens the situation. It doesn't improve it. But I'm a believer that most people that deal with these feelings, they really just need to examine what's bringing them on. Because I think if you're honest with yourself, um, especially having my own addictions over the years, it was hard to come to that reality and that truth of what it really was. And once I figured out what it was, then you start to plan how to remove yourself and move beyond that. Okay. How can you encourage healthy coping skills without sounding preachy or pushy?
I'm going to kind of give like an example with this one. So, a few years ago, when I was in my peak teenage years and I had raging hormones, um, me and I had a lot of issues with depression, and when I would talk to my mom about it, that's what she would want to do is she wanted to help me and she wanted to give me advice and she wanted to tell me how to fix it because she knows how to fix it. She's went through it before. But in those moments, I didn't want to hear, I guess, advice or telling me how to fix it. And because it sounded pushy and it sounded preachy. And so I think the best way to go about that is to start with more empathy than advice. And it doesn't mean that giving advice is wrong or my mom was wrong for trying to help me, but sometimes when emotions are high as well, meeting people with empathy first before advice is kind of allows them to be let in a little bit more. It makes them feel more understood than corrected. That's how I felt a lot of the time, was I was being corrected and disciplined more than I was understood and being supported, even though I was being supported and I was being understood. But an example is I'm here for you instead of here's what you need to do to fix it. Sometimes if my friends are going through something, I listen and I hear what they have to say, and we talk about how they feel about it, and we talk about yeah, their feelings on it. And then sometimes I'll say, well, if I was in that situation, I might do this. Maybe give advice a little bit after, because I am a person who wants to give everyone advice and tell them how to do things, because I'm a control freak, but I'm working on it. Yeah, just really, really talking about how they feel and listen to what they're saying before trying to give that advice a little bit. I think it helps a little bit more than just straight, here's what you need to do.
Yeah, I think it's important. Empathy is very, very important. Another tool is being able to ask them questions
Mm-hmm.
to get their feedback. And then you can ask other questions. Example, when my daughters were younger, they would buy certain clothes. And the question was, how often do you expect to wear that dress? And the response was, well, maybe once or twice. And my question was, do you think then spending $85 was a good way to use that money if you're only going to use it once or twice? I think it's just getting to the point where they start to see choices they've made.
Yeah, you lead them into the conclusion.
Because again, I'm a strong believer that 98% of the people can figure out their problems. I think many times we don't necessarily want to figure out our problem. We would rather just complain about it and procrastinate on it. But I just think one good thing is when you're with somebody and they are needing, they've come to you, is just to ask neutral questions, not to indict them, but just to find out what their mindset is that's brought them to that decision on that issue.
Okay, that's good. Yes.
Okay, how can you encourage healthy coping? Oh, we just did that. Okay. Okay, what are some small steps you can take on days when doing more feels impossible?
So this is kind of like another symptom of depression where, you have to carry on, life goes on, but you don't feel like it. That's the symptom of depression. And in a blunt way, you have to. Sometimes you have to focus a little bit more on the small things, like getting up and brushing your teeth. You're laying in bed and it's already noon, and you think brushing your teeth is, silly because it's noon. But getting up and brushing your teeth, doing one small thing, maybe taking a shower, maybe that'll jumpstart any kind of motivation. But also give yourself grace at the same time, because I know sometimes when I'm feeling depressed and I'm trying to focus on one need at a time, I end up piling everything on my shoulders all at once, and then I don't get anything done because I just stressed myself out. It's that balance of giving yourself grace, but also making yourself get up and do something. It's important, but I think that's the best small step, is getting up and showering, brushing your teeth, focusing on maybe hygiene. I think that works best for me, while giving yourself a little grace.
Okay. when we're in that depressive mode, and many of us are, whether it's seasonal or longer term, it really comes down to the act of the will. And that is, can I will myself to do a series of small tasks? Because if I can do one or two small tasks, that builds on more meaningful tasks. It's not always easy if it's brushing your teeth, showering. Um, I'm kind of the opinion that I'm going to make a statement here, and I can substantiate it, but I'm not going to. And that is, I think a lot of teenagers, a good percent of teenagers, bring on depression due to their involvement with their phone, the computer, trying to explain stuff to strangers that you've never met, that most likely don't really care. It's more of just a venue for them to maybe give advice, but that advice most of the time probably isn't all that valuable. But I think we have a tendency now in this century that we can incite depression quite easily, just through the phone, texting, TikTok, FaceTime, or Facebook, whatever it may be. I think one just has to be very cognizant of situations that bring on those depressive thoughts. That kind of goes a little bit beyond this question, but I feel it's very important to say that stuff right now. Okay, what is a coping skill that helps you calm down and not just distract you?
Before I get into a coping skill that I used, I'm going to get into a coping skill that I need to see people stop using. And that is getting on TikTok and scrolling until the sun comes down. Because it is the biggest distraction ever. It's you get upset over something that's probably you're getting upset over something that's valid, or maybe you are having some depressive thoughts or you are depressed. I know because I've done it many times, but instead of sitting and writing about my feelings or processing how I'm feeling or why I'm feeling this way, I just simply go on TikTok and ignore all of it. And I scroll and I scroll and I scroll and I won't do anything else because then I have to sit and deal with my thoughts. So I just scroll and I scroll and scroll and I get nothing done. And now all of my tasks that I was supposed to do for that day has now piled up on the next day because I scrolled all day and I didn't take a few minutes and figure out my thoughts. And that can snowball and snowball and snowball. And now you have 2 weeks worth of thoughts and concerns and issues and feelings that you've shoved down because you can scroll on your phone and
2 weeks of wasted time.
yeah, and stimulate your brain and distract your brain. And I've done that a lot. And it makes it so much worse. It's like digging yourself in a really, really, really big hole, and now you have to climb all the way back up. It's that easy. So what I've learned to do is put down my phone because it is a big issue, whether I'm trying to talk to somebody, a friend.
Does that mean turning it off or just putting it down?
Putting it down, going away from my phone.
Okay.
Yes.
I think it would be good to turn it off.
Yeah, I'll turn it completely off, honestly. And genuinely take a few hours, whether I sit down. There's been times where my thoughts are so prominent where I have to sit down and write it out and process it because I also am one who spirals and comes up with these crazy assumptions off of little information. And so I do have to sit down and write and look at the facts and separate my feelings. And sometimes I have to physically do that. But in times where my emotions are just high and I need to kind of re-engage, I gave a good example in the beginning where I went to the bathroom, a private space. I go into my room, which I still don't like doing because I feel like there's people still around me. So I go to my car or I go into a different spot where I feel completely by myself and I just feel my emotions. I process it. I process them. I use a pen and paper and I write things down. I take a few deep breaths, and now I'm at a solution. I'm at a clear mind. My mind isn't spiraling, and I can go inside and get my tasks done anxiety free. And then afterwards, I can get on my phone when my tasks are done. That's a good way that helps me calm down because I have noticed that getting on my phone makes everything worse. So I think it's important to have that you time, or there's even times where I've went and I've talked to somebody. I like to talk to my mom a lot about how I'm feeling, not even for advice, just to have somebody to talk to. And that helps me calm down sometimes. But real interaction, not over the phone interaction, that doesn't help either. I've tried talking to people. Say Snapchat is a big one. A lot of people try to confide in Snapchat and talk about their feelings on Snapchat. And when you're texting, tone can be misunderstood, social cues can be misunderstood, physical cues can be misunderstood. It's just not a good place to talk on. Online is not, and it's not going to help you calm down in the moment. So I would either find a private space, take a few deep breaths, or talk to somebody who is in real life and someone you can confide in, and that's someone that you trust. And that's my best advice for coping.
Okay, another simple way to deal with calming down is you count to 10 very slowly. And if you get to 10 and you're still not calmed down, then you go to 20. It has the same effect as deep breathing. But you don't race to 10. It's 1, 1001, 1002. And it just has a way of calming down something that you probably would say that you're going to regret, or an action that you carry through with that you're probably not wanting to do. And we live in a culture where it's very difficult to find those quiet places, especially with technology the way they have it. I would suggest one thing, that if you do have an addiction to the phone, is when you're in a situation, you turn the phone off and you put it in a drawer that's not easily accessible to, and you go and a phrase I used with my daughters for 30 years was, think about it. That's all I would tell them. Think about it. It required them to think about it. And they had to do some critical thinking, because again, most of the issues, especially with teenagers, are not life and death issues. They're more pebbles in the sand that we make a sandcastle out of. And people with active minds, you can go down that hole very, very quickly. So those are two ideas. Last question is, how do you rebuild motivation when depression makes everything feel pointless?
So this was kind of similar to the question before. I kind of answered it, but the only thing and the only person who can rebuild motivation is you. And you're not going to feel very motivated when you have to do it. But it's kind of like the pothole metaphor, where you're in a pothole and the pothole is something you have to get out of. There's no motivation to get out of that pothole because you're stuck in the mud. But you have to. You have to get up and you have to push yourself and start really small, maybe, but it's done without motivation usually. And the next time you get in that pothole, it's easier to pick yourself up with no motivation and do it because you'll see the outcome of motivation that comes pouring afterwards almost. So the simple answer is you have to build your motivation by starting and doing something and getting up and doing something. It's difficult and it's scary sometimes, but the more you do it, the easier it is to get out of the next pothole in life. And the more you're working on your identity and knowing who you are and being more intellectual with who you are and your emotions, I think it's important. And everyone has to do it.
Okay. If you look at life, we have thousands of potholes that we have to navigate from birth to death. And it's inevitable that we're going to fall into a pothole. The question isn't, did I fall into the pothole? The question is, how long am I going to stay in that pothole?
Mhm.
Because if I recognize that there is a way out of that pothole, it becomes a learning experience, which means the next time you are facing potentially a pothole, you can avoid it. But if you can't avoid it and you have to go into it, you usually don't have to stay in it very long because you can recall what got you out the last time.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, that concludes tonight's question and answers. Tomorrow, we're going to discuss values and responsibility at 5 o'clock. So please tune in to all you that are, especially our TikTok friends.
Our TikTok handle is the same as our YouTube handle. So if you search that in TikTok, it will pop up.
Yeah. So until then, have if you live in the Midwest, have a warm evening. Bye.
Yes, thank you guys.